The millionaire's family forced him to marry a high society woman. Desperate to escape, he asked for his maid's hand in marriage, beginning a journey of love and overcoming. The sound of the silver spoon gently hitting the porcelain cup echoed through the sumptuous hall of the Blackwell mansion. Eleanor Blackwell, matriarch of the family, watched her son Holden with a penetrating gaze as they discussed, for the 1000th time, their marital future. Charlotte Henderson will be at the charity ball next weekend, Eleanor commented casually. Although her intentions were anything but casual, her family owns half the luxury hotels in Manhattan. Holden, a 32-year-old man with neatly trimmed brown hair and expressive green eyes, kept his gaze fixed on the window overlooking the gardens of the estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Outside, a delicate figure moved among the roses, and his heart raced involuntarily. "Mom, we talked about this," he replied, trying to keep his composure. "I'm not interested in an arranged marriage based on fortune and social status." Eleanor put down her cup with more force than necessary. "Darling, you're the heir to Blackwell Industries. You have responsibilities, expectations to fulfill. Your father didn't build an empire for you to throw it away because of daydreams." The daydreams his mother was referring to had a name: Evangeline Pierce, or simply Evie, as everyone called her. She had been working as the mansion's housekeeper for 5 years, and during that time Holden had fallen completely in love with the 28-year-old, who carried with her a dignity and intelligence that transcended her social position. "These aren't daydreams, Mother," Holden finally faced Eleanor. "It's love." In the garden, Evie continued her meticulous work with the roses, unaware of the discussion going on inside the mansion. Her red hair was tied up in a loose bun, with a few strands escaping and dancing in the morning breeze. Her hands, protected by gardening gloves, moved with precision among the thorns. Inside the mansion, Eleanor stood up, her impeccable posture revealing years of social refinement. "Love? What do you know about love, Holden? This girl is probably only interested in your fortune, in your surname." "You don't know Evie," Holden replied, his voice firm but controlled. "She's the most genuine person I've ever met. Polite, intelligent, dedicated. A maid," Eleanor added, her voice as sharp as ice. "A great story for the social columns. Blackwell heir marries housekeeper. Can you imagine the scandal?" At that moment, Evie entered the hall, carrying a vase of freshly cut roses. Noticing the tension in the room, she hesitated, her cheeks blushing slightly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Holden. I didn't mean to interrupt." "No problem, Evie," Holden replied quickly, his gaze softening as it met hers. "The roses look lovely." Eleanor watched the exchange of glances between her son and the housekeeper, her displeasure growing. "Evangeline, you can leave the flowers and go." Evie nodded politely, placing the vase on a side table. As she left the hall, Holden felt his heart squeeze. Every time he saw her leave, it was as if a part of him went with her. "This conversation isn't over," Eleanor declared, heading for the door. "The charity ball will be on Saturday. Charlotte Henderson will be there, as will several other suitable young women. I hope you make the right choice." After his mother left, Holden remained in the hall, his thoughts a whirlwind. He knew he needed to make a decision, and fast. The pressure from his family was mounting, and he could no longer put off the inevitable. That night, while the mansion slept, Holden found Evie in the library, where she usually organized the books after everyone had retired. It was her favorite time of the day, when she could immerse herself in the world of literature without interruption. "Evie," he called softly, turning her around. "Mr. Holden, I was just—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "When we're alone, it's just Holden." She smiled shyly, but her eyes showed concern. "I overheard part of the conversation with your mother this morning. I'm sorry for causing trouble." "You don't cause trouble," he moved closer, taking her hands in his. "You've brought light into my life, Evie, and I can no longer pretend that what I feel for you is just admiration or friendship." "Holden, please," she tried to pull away, but he kept his hands together. "We can't. Your world is different from mine." "I don't care about different worlds," he declared. "I only care about you, about what we've built over the years, about every moment we've shared in this library, every conversation about literature, art, life, tears began to form in Evie's eyes. What if I'm just your form of rebellion against your family? What if one day you realize you threw it all away on an impulse? 5 years, Evie. 5 years of knowing you, admiring you, falling in love day after day. That's not an impulse. Holden held her face gently. Marry me. The request took Evie completely by surprise. She took a step back, her hands shaking. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, he replied, determined. I love you, Evie, and I'm willing to face anything, anyone, to be with you. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the library window, the moon illuminated their figures, creating shadows that danced on the bookshelves. The moment seemed suspended in time, as if the whole world was waiting for Evie's answer. I need time, she finally whispered. Please give me time to think. Holden nodded, respecting her request even though his heart begged for an immediate answer. As long as you need, but know that my feelings won't change. When Evie left the library that night, they both knew that nothing would ever be the same. A marriage proposal had been made, and with it, the fate of two people who loved each other but belonged to different worlds was about to be decided. The charity ball was approaching like a storm on the horizon, and Evie felt the weight of the decision she had to make with every step she took through the corridors of the Blackwell mansion. Holden's request echoed in her mind, mingling with the memories of the last 5 years. That morning, while organizing the guest room, she found an old photograph lying behind a chest of drawers. In the yellowed image, a young maid was smiling next to a well-dressed man, Eleanor Blackwell's parents. The irony didn't go unnoticed. History seemed to want to repeat itself, but with a different ending. I thought I'd find you here, the voice of Martha, the cook who had worked for the Blackwells for 30 years, interrupted her thoughts. The gray-haired lady with the kind face was the closest thing to a mother that Evie had. Martha, did you know about Mrs. Blackwell's parents? Evie showed the photograph. The cook took it carefully, her eyes filling with recognition. Oh yes, Regina was employed here, like you. Mr. Jonathan fell in love with her, but his family kicked her out before they could get married. He ended up marrying a socialite, and Regina, well, no one ever heard from her again. Evie's heart squeezed. It was exactly what she had feared. Just another sad chapter in a story that repeated itself through the generations. Eleanor never knew the truth, Martha continued. She grew up believing that her mother was from high society. Perhaps that's why she's so stubborn about keeping up appearances. On the other side of the mansion, Holden was facing his own battle. In his office, he analyzed documents that could guarantee his financial independence from his family. His work as a corporate lawyer had earned him considerable assets, separate from the Blackwell's business. Son, the voice of his father, Richard Blackwell, surprised him. The man with the gray hair and imposing posture rarely visited that part of the house. Dad, what are you doing here? Your mother told me about your plans. Richard closed the door behind him. I've come to offer you a deal. Holden straightened up in his chair. What kind of deal? Leave this madness aside, marry someone suitable, and in 5 years you'll take over as chairman of Blackwell Industries. Richard paused, his eyes fixed on his son. Otherwise, you'll have to build your own path, without our support or connections. Are you giving me an ultimatum? I'm giving you a choice, Richard corrected. One that I hope you'll make wisely. Meanwhile, in the back garden, Evie found refuge among her beloved roses. There, away from judgmental eyes, she allowed herself to relive every special moment with Holden. The conversations in the library about classic literature, the laughter shared during the dinners she served, the furtive glances that said more than 1,000 words. Miss Pierce. Charlotte Henderson, Eleanor's chosen suitor, appeared unexpectedly. The young socialite, with her impeccable suit and discreet jewelry, seemed out of place in the informal setting. Miss Henderson, may I help you? Actually, I've come to help you, Charlotte smiled, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. I know about you and Holden, and believe me, I'm doing you a favor by suggesting you back off. Evie remained dignified, even though she felt her heart racing. I appreciate your concern, but my relationship with Mr. Blackwell is none of your business. On the contrary, Charlotte moved closer. When we get married, I'll be the mistress of this house. And I don't intend to have a housekeeper who was once intimate with my husband. The conversation was interrupted by firm footsteps. Holden had witnessed the end of the conversation, and his expression was one of pure indignation. "Charlotte, I suggest you leave." His voice was controlled, but loaded with authority. "And for your information, there will be no marriage between us." After Charlotte left, visibly upset, Holden turned to Evie. "Don't let them intimidate you. You're stronger than that." "But she's right, Holden," Evie replied, tears threatening to fall. "This world, its rules, its expectations, weren't made for people like me." "Then let's create our own world." He held up his hands. "I have my own resources. We can start over wherever we want. Greenwich, Manhattan, Boston. The world is ours." At that moment, Martha appeared in the garden, her face worried. "Evie, darling, Eleanor wants to talk to you." Now, Eleanor Blackwell's office was a testament to power and tradition. Sitting behind her mahogany desk, the Blackwell matriarch held up the old photograph that Evie had found earlier. "Do you know who these people are?" Eleanor asked, her voice surprisingly soft. "Your mother, ma'am," Evie replied, gathering her courage. "Regina." The silence that followed was dense. Eleanor looked at the photograph with an expression Evie had never seen before, a mixture of sadness and recognition. "Martha told me the truth today," Eleanor finally spoke. "About my mother, about how she was forced to leave." Her eyes met Evie's. "History doesn't have to repeat itself, Evangeline, but the choice has to be yours." As she left the office, Evie realized that the universe had conspired to bring long-buried truths to light. The charity ball was only 2 days away, and with it, the moment to make a decision that would change not only her life, but that of everyone around her. In her simple room at the back of the mansion, Evie took out pen and paper. It was time to put her feelings into words, to be honest with herself and with Holden. The future was uncertain, but she knew one thing: true love deserved a chance, even if the price was too high. Evie's letter rested on her desk, the carefully chosen words revealing her deepest feelings. After a sleepless night, she had finally managed to express everything her heart held. Now, on the morning of the charity ball, the Blackwell mansion was buzzing with preparations, while important decisions hung in the air. The floral arrangements need to be distributed throughout the main hall. Eleanor commanded a team of decorators, her authoritative tone masking the unease she had felt since the revelation about her true origin. Every now and then, her gaze met Evie's, who was overseeing the organization of the last details, and something different could be noticed: a silent understanding, perhaps even a hint of empathy. Holden spent the morning in meetings with his accountant and personal lawyer, preparing for any scenario. His father, Richard, watched his son's movements with a mixture of reluctant pride and concern. Deep down, he recognized in Holden the same determination he himself had had when building his empire. "Mr. Blackwell," Martha intercepted Holden as he was leaving his office. "There's something you need to know." The cook looked around, making sure they were alone. "I found it in the mansion's old archives." She held out a yellowed envelope. Inside was a letter dated 1965, written by Regina, Eleanor's mother. The words, though faded by time, told a story of forbidden love and sacrifice. Regina hadn't just disappeared. She had been forced to sign a confidentiality agreement and paid a considerable sum of money never to come near the family again. "My mother needs to see this," Holden muttered. But Martha held his arm. "There's more. Regina had another child after she left. That means Eleanor has a brother she's never met." The revelation struck Holden like a thunderbolt. His family, which prized the appearance of perfection, was built on secrets and lies. How could they judge his love for Evie when their own foundations were so fragile? In the winter garden, Evie was arranging the last roses for the ball when Charlotte Henderson appeared again, this time accompanied by her mother, Victoria Henderson. "So this is the housekeeper." Victoria examined Evie with a calculating gaze. "Darling, I'll be blunt. How much do you want to disappear?" Evie felt the blood freeze in her veins. "Ma'am, I'm afraid there's a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Victoria pulled a checkbook out of her purse. Everyone has their price. What's yours? My heart is not for sale, Evie replied with dignity, surprising herself with her firmness. And I suggest you direct your indecent proposals to someone with less integrity. The discussion was interrupted by Eleanor, who had heard everything. Victoria, I believe it's time for you and Charlotte to leave. The ball is cancelled. The Hendersons left indignantly, while Eleanor turned to Evie. You remind me of my mother more than you know. She had that quiet strength too. Ma'am, about your mother? I know everything now, Eleanor interrupted her gently. And I realize that I've spent years perpetuating the same cycle of prejudice that destroyed her happiness. Maybe it's time to break that chain. At that moment, Holden entered the winter garden, Regina's letter in his hands. Mom, we need to talk about Regina and about the brother you've never met. The next few hours were a roller coaster of emotions. The Blackwell family gathered in the library, where long-buried secrets came to light. Eleanor cried as she read her mother's words, finally understanding why she had always felt an inexplicable emptiness in her life. I'm going to find your brother, Holden promised, and I'm going to bring the truth to light, no matter what the cost. No, Eleanor interrupted him. We'll find him, as a family. She turned to Evie, who was watching the scene from the doorway. All of us. Richard, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. Maybe it's time to admit that tradition without love is just a gilded prison. Eleanor, we've already lost too much time and precious people because of empty social conventions. The sun was beginning to set when Evie finally handed Holden his letter. Alone in the library, he read every word with his heart racing. Dear Holden, I spent 5 years trying not to fall in love with you. Failed miserably. Every book we discussed, every smile we shared, every silent moment in this library made me love you even more. I feared I was just a repeat of Regina's story, but today I understand that our love is strong enough to write its own story. So yes, I will marry you. Not because you're a Blackwell, but because you're simply Holden, the man who sees beyond appearances, who fights for what he believes in, who makes me want to be better every day. With all my heart, Evie. When their gazes met, no words were needed. The kiss they shared was a silent promise that, together, they would build a future where love would prevail over prejudice and social conventions. The Blackwell mansion, which for so long had been a symbol of tradition and appearances, was beginning to transform into a place where truth and love could flourish freely, like the roses Evie had so lovingly cultivated in the garden. The morning after the charity ball was cancelled, the Blackwell mansion woke up differently. News of Eleanor's decision spread quickly through Greenwich's social circles, and the phones kept ringing with people trying to confirm the rumors about the romance between the Blackwell heir and the housekeeper. The Hendersons are spreading absurd stories, Richard commented over breakfast, folding the local newspaper which already carried a small note about the scandal. Victoria has always had a special talent for dramatizing situations. To everyone's surprise, Eleanor remained serene. Let them talk. This family has lived long enough worrying about appearances. She turned to Holden, who had just entered the dining room. Has your private investigator found any leads on my brother? Yes, Holden replied, taking his seat at the table. His name is Marcus Bennett. He lives in Boston and is a professor of history at Harvard. Eleanor let out a shaky sigh. After decades of believing she was an only child, the reality of having a brother still seemed surreal. How are we going to approach him? What will we say? I've already made an appointment, Holden revealed. I said it was about genealogical research. He seemed interested, especially when I mentioned the name Regina. Evie, who was pouring the coffee, felt the weight of the moment. The Blackwell family was changing before her eyes, and she was part of that change. When she had finished pouring, she tried to discreetly leave, but Eleanor surprised her. Evie, please sit with us. The request caused a moment's hesitation. In 5 years working at the mansion, she had never been invited to sit at the main table. Richard pulled out a chair, indicating the place next to Holden. If you're going to become part of this family, Richard said with a soft smile, you'd better start getting used to formal breakfasts. As Evie settled down, feeling simultaneously honored and out of place, Martha entered the room carrying yet another letter found in the archives. This one, unlike the previous one, had been written by Jonathan, Eleanor's father, shortly before his death. "I found it hidden in a book in the library," Martha explained, handing Eleanor the envelope. With trembling hands, Eleanor read it aloud. "My dear child, by the time you read this letter, I will be gone. I carry with me the weight of many regrets, but none greater than having allowed your mother to be separated from us. Regina was the most extraordinary person I have ever met, and my cowardice in not standing up to my family cost us a lifetime of happiness. I tried to find her over the years, but she had completely disappeared. I only found out about her brother recently from an old friend in Boston. I didn't have the courage to look for him, for fear of destroying the life he had built. I hope that one day you will find the strength to do what I didn't. Choose love over social conventions. With eternal love, your father." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of birds in the garden. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, her eyes watering. "We need to go to Boston today," she declared. "I'm not wasting another day of my brother's life." "I'll go with you," Polden offered immediately. "We're all going," Richard added, surprising everyone. "It's time for this family to truly reunite." While the Blackwells prepared for the trip, Evie returned to her quarters to pack a small suitcase. Her simple room, which had been her refuge for so long, now seemed a symbol of the life she was leaving behind. "It's strange, isn't it?" Martha appeared in the doorway. "How life can change completely in a matter of days. Sometimes I'm afraid of waking up and discovering that it's all a dream," Evie confessed, folding a simple dress. "It's not a dream, darling." Martha approached, handing Evie a small jewelry box. "This belonged to Regina. Eleanor asked you to wear it." Inside the box was a delicate pearl necklace, simple but elegant. A note accompanied the jewel, to remind you that true love always finds its way, Eleanor. The journey to Boston was silent, each occupant of the car immersed in their own thoughts. Polden drove, with Evie by his side, while Eleanor and Richard occupied the back seat. The autumn landscape of Connecticut gave way to the busy streets of Massachusetts. Harvard loomed imposingly before them, its historic buildings silent witnesses to countless life stories. The history department was housed in a red brick building, surrounded by trees whose leaves were beginning to turn golden. "Professor Bennett is in his office," said an assistant, leading the way. In front of the oak door with a simple sign that read, "Dr. Marcus Bennett," Eleanor hesitated. All the years of secrets and separation seemed to be converging on this moment. "We're with you," Polden assured her, holding her mother's hand. When the door opened, revealing a middle-aged man with the same piercing eyes as Eleanor, time seemed to freeze. Marcus Bennett looked at the group curiously, but when his gaze met Eleanor's, something changed in his expression, an instinctive recognition that transcended words. "Regina," he murmured, seeing in Eleanor's features the reflection of his own mother. The truth, guarded for so long, was about to unite not only a divided family, but also pave the way for a new beginning, where love and acceptance would finally prevail over prejudice and outdated traditions. Professor Marcus Bennett's office at Harvard was exactly what you would expect from an academic's environment. Bookshelves filled to the ceiling with books, framed historical maps on the walls, and an antique desk covered in meticulously organized papers. But at that moment, no one was paying attention to the details. The air was charged with emotion as brother and sister looked at each other for the first time. "You have her eyes," Marcus said softly, still standing behind his desk. "Regina's eyes." Eleanor stepped forward, her legs trembling slightly. "Have you always known about me?" "Since I was 16, Marcus replied, gesturing for everyone to sit down on the available chairs. "Regina, our mother, told me everything on her deathbed, but she made me promise never to look for the Blackwell family. She said it would be better that way." Richard, who had remained silent until then, snorted. "The confidentiality agreement. It was my father who orchestrated all this." "Yes," Marcus confirmed, his gaze hardening momentarily. "She was paid a considerable sum to disappear. She used the money to give me an education, to build a new life away from Greenwich. But she never completely got over the loss." Holden watched the scene with Evie by his side, their hands discreetly intertwined. Regina and Jonathan's story echoed painfully close to their own, but with one crucial difference. This time, the Blackwell family was choosing a different path. "Why did you decide to see us today?" Eleanor asked, noticing a framed photo on Marcus's desk of him as a young man, next to a smiling woman and two teenage children. Marcus smiled gently. "Because life is too short to carry grudges. I have my own family now, my wife Claire, our children Emma and Lucas, and I've always wondered what it would be like to have a sister." "Uncles?" A young voice interrupted from the doorway. It was Emma Bennett, 17, carrying a pile of books. Next to her, Lucas, 15, looked curiously at the visitors. "Dad, the secretary said you had important visitors, but come here," Marcus called to his sons. "Meet your Aunt Eleanor, your Uncle Richard, your cousin Holden and," he hesitated, looking at Evie. "My fiancée, Evie," Holden added firmly, causing Emma and Lucas to smile discreetly. The afternoon passed like a surreal dream. Claire Bennett arrived shortly after, bringing coffee and homemade cookies. The stories flowed naturally. Marcus telling how Regina had rebuilt her life in Boston, working as a librarian while studying at night. Eleanor sharing memories of Jonathan, who had died carrying the weight of his regrets. "He tried to find you," Eleanor revealed, showing Marcus the letter. But Mom had been meticulous about hiding her tracks. "She was afraid," Marcus explained, his fingers tracing the words written by a father he had never met. "Afraid that they would try to separate us too. But I think, deep down, she always hoped that one day this story would have a different ending." Emma, who had inherited her father's academic curiosity, was fascinated by the family history. "It's like those period novels I always read, but real. Life sometimes surpasses fiction," Evie commented softly, earning an understanding look from the young woman. "You should stay for dinner," Claire suggested. "I know a wonderful Italian restaurant nearby. We can celebrate this reunion properly." Giuliano's was a family-run establishment in the heart of Cambridge, with checkered tablecloths and candles and old wine bottles. As they waited for their plates, Eleanor watched in amazement as her nephews interacted naturally with Holden and Evie, as if they had always been part of the family. "You know," Marcus commented softly to his sister, "Regina always said that true love has a way of finding its way, no matter how long it takes." Eleanor looked at Holden and Evie, who were chatting animatedly with Emma about classical literature. She was right, and this time, let's not let social prejudices destroy this chance of happiness. "When's the wedding?" Lucas asked abruptly, making everyone laugh. "We haven't set a date yet," Holden replied, looking fondly at Evie. "But I was thinking, maybe we could hold the ceremony here in Boston. A new beginning, in a place that now means so much to our family." "Harvard's Botanical Garden is beautiful in spring," Claire suggested, "and I'm sure Marcus could use his connections at the university." As the newly reunited family excitedly planned for the future, Evie felt a peace she had never experienced before. There, among people who until a few hours ago were strangers, she found what she had always longed for: unconditional acceptance and true love. Richard, watching the scene with moist eyes, raised his glass of wine. "To family," he proposed. "Not the one given to us by surnames or social conventions, but the one we choose with our hearts." The glasses clinked in celebration, and in the walls of the old Italian restaurant echoed not only the laughter and chatter of a reunited family, but also the silent promise that some circles can be broken, some stories can have different endings, and love, when true, always finds its way home. The smell of fresh coffee permeated the kitchen of the Blackwell mansion as Evie adjusted her new pearl necklace, Eleanor's gift, in front of the mirror. 2 weeks had passed since the revealing trip to Boston, and the house looked different now, as if the very foundations had readjusted to accommodate all the changes. "The New York Times called again," Martha commented, handing Evie a steaming cup. "Apparently, the story of the Blackwell heiress finding her lost brother is front-page material for the social column." "Has Eleanor already decided to give the interview?" Evie asked, gently blowing on her coffee. "Yes, but on one interesting condition," Martha smiled. "She wants the story to be about new beginnings and forgiveness, not scandals." and she insisted that her marriage to Holden be mentioned as an example of how times have changed. The sound of footsteps interrupted the conversation. Emma and Lucas Bennett, who were spending the weekend at the mansion, entered the kitchen carrying their laptops. "Auntie Evie," Emma exclaimed. She had adopted the familiar title even before the wedding. "We need your opinion on the flowers for the wedding. I found an amazing florist in Cambridge who works exclusively with organic species." Lucas, for his part, was absorbed in his own project. "I'm putting together a presentation on family history for my class. Did you know that the Blackwells arrived in Greenwich in 1892? I found old photos of the mansion being built." Speaking of family history, Holden appeared in the doorway. "Marcus and Claire have just arrived, and they brought something you need to see." In the library that had become the unofficial center of family gatherings, Marcus was carefully unpacking an old shoebox. "I found these in the attic of our house in Cambridge. It's Mom's memories of Greenwich." Eleanor, who had cancelled all her meetings for the day to be present, held up a sepia photograph with trembling hands. In it, a young Regina smiled radiantly in a simple dress, holding a bouquet of roses from the garden. Next to her, Jonathan Blackwell gazed at her with undeniable adoration. "It was taken right here in this garden," Richard observed, recognizing the setting. "The same rose bushes that Evie is tending today." "There's more," Marcus continued, pulling out a leather-bound diary. "Mom's diary. She wrote about everything from her work at the mansion, the romance with Jonathan, the months of pregnancy with Eleanor." Claire, who was watching the scene with watery eyes, hugged her husband from behind. "Read it to them, darling. Read the part about the garden." Marcus opened the diary to a marked page and began to read. "May 15th, 1962 today. While pruning the roses, Jonathan found me in the garden. He said that the flowers had never looked so beautiful, but his eyes were fixed on me, not on the rose bushes. We talked about literature. He had just read Pride and Prejudice at my suggestion. 'You made me realize, Regina,' he said, 'that some traditions are worth breaking.' Then he kissed me, right there, among the white roses his grandmother had planted. At that moment, we weren't boss and maid. We were just a man and a woman, in love under the Greenwich sun." Emma let out a romantic sigh. "It's like a movie, and now history is repeating itself, but this time with a happy ending." "History isn't repeating itself," Eleanor corrected gently. "It's being rewritten. We're choosing a different path." Holden, who had remained silent, approached Evie. "Speaking of different paths, I have a proposal to make." He addressed everyone in the room. "The wedding in Boston will be perfect to symbolize our new beginning. But first, I'd like to do something here, in the garden. An intimate ceremony, just for family, exactly where Regina and Jonathan fell in love." "Among the white roses," Evie added, understanding, "as a way of honoring the past while celebrating the future." "And I have another suggestion," Richard said, surprising everyone. "The east wing of the mansion has been practically empty since the last employees retired. We could renovate it, turn it into an independent house. For you." "Dad," Holden began, overcome with emotion. "You're my only son, Holden. And Evie," Richard smiled at his future daughter-in-law, "you've brought more light into this family than you know. Having you around would be a gift." Lucas, who had been typing furiously on his laptop, looked up. "I've just been researching. The east wing has the best view of the rose garden, and there's enough room for when you have children." "Lucas," Claire scolded him, but everyone laughed. "Actually," Evie blushed slightly, "I think we'll need that space sooner than we thought." The silence that followed was broken by a cry of joy from Eleanor. "Are you?" Holden, who had just finished processing the news, pulled Evie into a tight hug. "When did you find out?" "Yesterday," she smiled through her tears. "I wanted to wait for the right moment to tell you." Martha, who was watching everything from the doorway, discreetly wiped away a tear. In her 30 years serving the Blackwells, she had never seen the family so genuinely happy. "Do you know what that means?" Emma asked, her eyes shining. "We need to add a nursery to the renovation project." As the family dissolved into excited plans and emotional hugs, Marcus silently leafed through Regina's diary. On one of the last pages, he found an entry that made him smile. True love is like the roses in the Blackwell garden. It may endure harsh winters, but it always blooms again in spring. Perhaps one day, when the world is wiser and kinder, someone will have the courage we didn't have, and the roses will bear witness to a love that can finally bloom freely. The news of Evie's pregnancy spread through the Blackwell mansion like the scent of roses on the wind, bringing with it a wave of transformation. The East Wing, once silent and forgotten, now echoed with the sound of hammers and saws as the renovation progressed rapidly under Richard's close supervision. The nursery will have the best view of the garden, Eleanor explained, poring over the architectural plans with Claire and Emma on a Thursday morning. The three women had formed an impromptu decorating team, mixing the classic with modern touches that reflected the family's new phase. "I found something interesting during the demolition of the old wall," Richard interrupted, entering the office with a small object in his hands. It was an old music box, its surface stained by time. When he opened it, a soft melody filled the room. "That music?" Eleanor paused, her eyes widening in recognition. "Dad used to sing it to put me to sleep." Marcus, who was visiting again, approached with curiosity. "Regina used to sing it too, every night, without fail." The discovery of the music box triggered a whole afternoon of exploration in the East Wing. Among the old walls, the family found other treasures: old letters, forgotten photographs, small fragments of a love story that refused to be forgotten. Meanwhile, in the garden, Evie was overseeing the preparation of the space for the intimate ceremony that would take place in 2 weeks' time. The white rose bushes, silent witnesses to the love between Regina and Jonathan, were starting to sprout again. "Sometimes I feel like she's here," Evie confessed to Martha, who was helping her prune some branches. "Regina, as if she had planned all this." "Maybe she did," Martha smiled, adjusting her apron. "Love has those things, dear. It finds ways to heal old wounds, even after so long." Polden appeared in the garden, carrying a folder of documents. "The lawyer has just sent over the papers. The East Wing will be officially registered in our name after the wedding." "Our name?" Evie repeated softly, still getting used to the idea. Her hand rested instinctively on her belly, where a new life was beginning to grow. Lucas, who had become the unofficial family historian, spent the afternoon organizing a timeline of all the discoveries. "It's amazing how everything connects," he observed, pasting another photo onto the large panel he was assembling. "Every decision, every moment." "Like a garden," Emma added, helping her brother. "Some seeds take years to flower." Preparing for the ceremony in the garden brought a special energy to the mansion. Eleanor insisted on wearing the wedding dress they had found among Regina's belongings, a delicate piece that had never been worn, but which fitted Evie perfectly after a few adjustments. "Something old," Eleanor declared, helping Evie try on the dress. "And this," she continued, attaching a sapphire brooch to the fabric, "is something blue. It was a present from my father to my mother." Claire, watching the scene with Marcus, whispered, "It's like the universe is conspiring to right an old wrong." The night before the ceremony, Polden found Evie in the library, her special place. She was rereading Regina's diary, absorbed in the words that echoed through time. "I found the perfect page for our vows," she said, without raising her eyes. "Love isn't just about grandiose moments or dramatic gestures. It's about choosing the same person every day, through storms and calms." "Regina was a wise woman," Polden commented, taking a seat next to her. "Just like you." "I'm nervous," Evie admitted, closing the diary. "Not about the wedding, but about everything. Being a mother, being part of this family officially." "You're already part of this family," came a voice from the doorway. It was Richard, carrying an old box. "And this is to prove it." Inside the box was the engagement ring that had belonged to Jonathan Blackwell's mother, a delicate piece with a solitaire diamond, symbolizing generations of family history. "It should have been given to Regina," Richard explained. "Jonathan kept it until the end, waiting for the day when he could give it to her. Now it's yours." The tears that Evie had been trying to hold back finally fell. Polden took the ring reverently and, even though he had already made the official request, knelt down again. "With this ring," he said softly, "I'm not just asking you to be my wife. I'm asking you to help rewrite our family history, to create new traditions based on love and acceptance." As the ring slid onto Evie's finger, perfectly fitted as if it had been made for her, Martha appeared with a tray of tea and cookies, an evening tradition that had begun when Evie was still just the housekeeper. "For our last night of tea before the big day," the cook smiled, her eyes shining with restrained tears. And so, in the library that had witnessed the beginning of their love, Polden and Evie shared a quiet moment with those who had become much more than bosses or co-workers. They had become family. The Blackwell mansion, which for so long had been a symbol of rigid traditions and stifling expectations, now breathed new air. The walls that once held secrets now echoed with laughter and plans for the future. And in the garden, Regina's white roses continued to bloom, as a silent reminder that true love always finds its way home. The day of the intimate ceremony dawned with a gentle breeze caressing the rose bushes in the Blackwell garden. Evie watched the final preparations from her temporary window in the mansion, her last morning before officially becoming a Blackwell. Martha had insisted on maintaining the tradition of bride and groom being separated the night before the wedding, even though it was a small ceremony. "I did it." Emma burst into the room, carrying an old box. "I found it in Grandma Regina's things. They're blue ribbons that she used to tie special bouquets. I thought we could use them for your bouquet today." Evie touched the ribbons gently, imagining Regina's hands doing the same thing years ago. "It's perfect, Emma. Thank you." Claire entered soon after, bringing a light breakfast. Marcus is downstairs with Holden. Apparently, they found some more old photos in the office and are having quite an emotional time. "How's Lucas doing with his timeline project?" Evie asked, trying to distract herself from her growing nervousness. "Completely absorbed," Claire laughed. "He's discovered that the first white rose bush was planted in 1890 by Jonathan's great-grandmother. He's convinced that there's some kind of family destiny attached to that garden." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, already dressed elegantly for the occasion. Her eyes sparkled when she saw Evie. "Mum's dress looks even more beautiful today." Regina's vintage dress had been carefully restored, retaining its original elegance while gently hugging the small curve that was beginning to form in Evie's belly. Martha had personally sewn every necessary adjustment, her expert hands treating the fabric as if it were made of gold. Downstairs, Polden was trying to keep his composure as he looked through the photographs with Marcus. One in particular caught his eye: young Jonathan, sitting on the same bench in the garden where he used to meet Evie for their conversations about literature. "There's something written on the back," Marcus noticed, carefully turning the photo over. Regina's delicate handwriting read, "True love knows no barriers of time or circumstance. It simply is." Richard, who was watching the scene from his office door, snorted to attract attention. "Son, there's something I want to show you before the ceremony." Father and son walked to the newly refurbished East Wing. The space had been transformed, retaining classic elements of the mansion while incorporating modern touches that reflected Holden and Evie's style. "This will be your new beginning," Richard said, his voice laden with restrained emotion. "But first, I want you to have this." He handed Holden a small leather-bound book. "Grandpa Jonathan's diary? The last few pages are especially important," Richard pointed out. "He wrote about his regrets, but also about his hopes for the future of the family." Polden opened to the final pages, where he found a letter addressed to his future grandchildren. "My dears, by the time you read this, I hope the world will have become a place where love can flourish freely, without the ties that once bound us. May you have the courage I lacked, and may the white roses of the Blackwell garden continue to bear witness to stories of true love. With all my love, Jonathan." In the garden, the last preparations were being finalized. Martha supervised the decorations with a critical eye, ensuring that every detail was perfect. The white chairs were arranged in an intimate semicircle around the main rose bushes, and blue ribbons, the same ones Emma had found, danced gently in the breeze. Lucas, taking a break from his history project, was helping to position the old photographs that would be displayed during the reception. "It's like we're connecting all the dots," he commented to Victoria, who was passing by with more arrangements. "Every story, every moment has brought us here." When it came time for the ceremony, the Blackwell's garden seemed to glow with a light of its own. The small group of guests, just family and close friends, settled down as soft music began to play. Eleanor led Evie down the path of white petals, both sharing a moment of silent understanding. They weren't just godmother and bride walking together. They were two women carrying on Regina's legacy, transforming a story of separation into one of union. Polden was waiting by the white rose bushes, the exact spot where, decades before, Regina and Jonathan had shared their first kiss. Marcus was by his side as best man, completing a circle that began long before either of them was born. And so, under the same sky that had witnessed so many of the Blackwell's love stories, Polden and Evie were preparing to add their own chapter to the family narrative. A chapter of redemption, of breaking down barriers, and of a love that, like the rose bushes in the garden, found the strength to flourish even in the most unlikely of places. The ceremony in the garden had been perfect, but the real journey had only just begun. A week after their intimate wedding, Polden and Evie finally moved into the renovated east wing of the Blackwell mansion, transforming the space into their own sanctuary. "I still can't believe we found this," Evie commented, unpacking a box marked "Library." In her hands was an old copy of Pride and Prejudice, the same book Regina had recommended to Jonathan decades ago. "It must have been hidden away on a shelf all these years," Polden replied, moving closer to examine the book. The yellowed pages contained annotations in the margins, made by two distinct handwritings, Regina and Jonathan conversing across time in the pages of the novel. Adapting to the new routine brought unexpected challenges. Eleanor, in her process of healing and transformation, began making daily visits, bringing with her stories and memories that helped fill in the gaps of the past. "I found more letters today," she announced over a shared breakfast in the new East Wing kitchen. Apparently, Dad kept a secret diary of every meaningful moment he spent with Mom. He never stopped loving her. Marcus and his family had decided to spend more time in Greenwich, renting a house next to the mansion. Emma and Lucas, in particular, were delighted with the idea of following Evie's pregnancy closely. "Have you thought of names?" Lucas asked, still working on his family timeline, now expanded to include the next generation. "If it's a girl," Evie touched her belly gently. "I was thinking Regina." The suggestion brought tears to Eleanor and Marcus' eyes. "What if it's a boy?" Claire asked, sitting by the window overlooking the rose garden. "Jonathan," Polden replied without hesitation, "to remind us that some stories deserve a second chance." Richard, who had become surprisingly sentimental since the wedding, devoted his mornings to the garden. Together with Martha, he learned the secrets of growing the white roses that meant so much to the family. "Your grandfather used to say that each rose has its own personality," Martha explained to Holden one morning as they pruned together. "Some are stubborn, others delicate, but they all need love and patience to flourish." Evie's pregnancy was progressing, bringing with it a new dimension of family togetherness. Eleanor insisted on transforming the old music room into a nursery, preserving historic elements of the mansion while creating a welcoming space for the new generation. "I found this in Mom's things." Marcus showed Evie a delicate mobile made with crystals. "She made it when she was pregnant with me, hidden away in Boston. Now it can cradle another Blackwell baby." The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the mansion witnessed the harmonious fusion of past and present. Evie continued her work in the garden, now assisted by Emma, who showed a natural talent for gardening. "It's as if the roses respond to you," Emma observed, seeing how much more vibrant the flowers looked under Evie's care. Grandma Regina would be proud. One afternoon, while organizing what would become the baby's room, Polden found a letter addressed to him, written by his father years ago. "Dear son, there are times in life when we have to choose between what is expected and what is true. I spent years perpetuating traditions that stifled true love in our family. Don't make the same mistakes. The most important legacy we can leave is not a name or a fortune, but the courage to love freely. With love, Dad." The letter sparked a deep conversation between father and son, resulting in a significant decision: the creation of a foundation in Regina's name, aimed at supporting young people from humble backgrounds who dreamed of higher education. "It's a way of honoring her memory," Richard explained during the dinner at which he announced the initiative, "and to ensure that other love stories are not hindered by social barriers." The news was greeted with enthusiasm by the whole family. Lucas immediately offered to help with the historical research needed to document Regina's story, while Claire, with her experience in social work, was willing to help structure the program. "See how it all connects?" Martha commented, serving her famous apple pie. "Every choice, every moment of courage, has brought us this far." As autumn approached, bringing new colors to the rose garden, the Blackwell mansion breathed an atmosphere of renewal and hope. The love that had once been denied now bloomed freely, not just in the white rose bushes, but in the hearts of everyone who called the place home. Evie, watching the sunset from her new balcony, held Holden's hand as she felt the baby's first movements. "Sometimes I wonder if Regina knew this would happen one day," she whispered. "If when she planted those roses, she was also planting the seeds of our future." The baby's cry echoed through the halls of the Blackwell mansion one spring morning. Regina Grace Blackwell came into the world exactly 5 years after the day Holden proposed to Evie in the library, as if the universe wanted to underline the perfection of the cycle being completed. "She's got Mama's eyes," Marcus whispered, watching his newborn niece in Eleanor's arms. The Blackwell matriarch could barely hold back the tears as she held the little one who bore her own mother's name. The east wing of the mansion, now a vibrant and welcoming home, was filled with photographs telling the story of the family, old and new, intertwined like the branches of the rose bushes in the garden. Lucas, now 20 and a history student at Harvard, had finished his family project, which ended up becoming a book, The Blackwell Roses, a love story through the generations. "It's amazing how some stories need time to find their true ending," Emma commented, leafing through the first copies of her brother's book. She herself had become a respected landscape designer, specializing in the preservation of historic gardens. The Regina Blackwell Foundation, established by Richard, had changed the lives of dozens of young people in recent years. Claire coordinated the scholarship program and often shared heartwarming stories of students who, like Regina, dreamed of transcending their circumstances through education. "Yesterday, I met a young woman who reminded me so much of her," Claire recounted during one of the family dinners that have become a Thursday tradition. "She works as a governess to pay her way through literature school." Martha, who even after her official retirement was still a constant presence at the mansion, smiled when she heard the story. Some stories have a special way of echoing through time. Holden, who divided his time between the law firm and running the foundation, found his true calling in helping couples from different walks of life overcome legal and family barriers. His own story with Evie had become a symbol of hope. "Sometimes I wonder what Regina and Jonathan would say if they could see all this," Evie reflected one evening, as she cradled little Regina in the old garden swing. The furniture had been restored by Richard as a birth present for his granddaughter. "They see," Eleanor replied softly, joining her daughter-in-law. "Through the roses, through every life we've changed, through this little one that carries your names and your legacy." The Blackwell mansion, once a symbol of rigid traditions and stifling expectations, had become a beacon of change and acceptance. The doors that once closed to Regina now opened to welcome people from all backgrounds. "Did you know we found more letters?" Marcus commented one afternoon in the garden. "They were hidden inside a copy of Romeo and Juliet in the library. Dad wrote them to Mom years after he left, even though he knew he would never send them." The letters, yellowed by time but preserving the love in every word, were added to the family archive that Lucas kept meticulously organized. Each document, each photograph, each little piece of history helped to build a narrative of redemption and hope. Richard, watching his granddaughter grow among the rose bushes that had witnessed so many love stories, finally found peace with the family legacy. "You know," he said during the celebration of little Regina's first birthday, "I spent years trying to preserve a name, a reputation, but the real treasure of the Blackwells has always been the love that blooms here, in this garden." The new generation of the family was growing up in an environment where love was celebrated in all its forms. Emma was engaged to a music teacher she met through the foundation, while Lucas found his vocation in documenting stories of families who, like his own, chose love over social conventions. "Each rose has its own story," Evie explained to her daughter as she taught her how to tend the garden. Little Regina, with her bright, curious eyes, absorbed every word like flowers absorb sunlight. Martha, in her moments of reflection in the kitchen that she still considered her domain, often commented on how the mansion seemed more alive, more welcoming. "It's as if the very walls breathe love now," she would say, preparing the cookies that had become a tradition at family gatherings. And so, among the white rose bushes that Regina had planted so many years ago, a new story continued to be written, a story no longer of separation and prejudice, but of union and acceptance. The love that had once been denied now blossomed freely, passing from generation to generation like the very roses in the Blackwell garden. In the library, now a shared space where old and new stories mingled on the shelves, Polden and Evie would often meet up in the evening, reliving the moments that had brought them there. The copy of Pride and Prejudice that belonged to Regina occupied a place of honor, its pages marked with the notes that told her own story of forbidden love. "Do you know what thrills me the most?" Evie asked one of those nights, watching her daughter sleeping peacefully on the sofa in the library. "It's that our little Regina will never know the weight of the social expectations that separated her great-grandparents. She will grow up knowing that true love knows no barriers." And on the walls of the Blackwell mansion, between portraits of generations past and present, history continued to be written, no longer in the ink of sadness and separation, but in the vibrant colors of love that had finally found its place to flourish.